That's a great story.
Well, let's see how much of it's true.
That's a great story.
Well, let's see how much of it's true.
That's a great story.
Well, let's see how much of it's true. You know, I'm not a young man anymore. I'm 82 years old, and it's nice to put this shit down.
So you grew up in Sacramento, and you ended
Yes.
up in Mendocino.
Well, I ended up in San Francisco. I sold the Lord's Prayer and gave him a penny. Every single word entirely readable, right before your eyes.
What did you do? Explain that again.
I sold the Lord's Prayer engraved on a penny. This thing here, right here, on the cover of the magazine.
Why don't you hold that up?
This right here. It's the Lord's Prayer engraved on a single solitary penny. Every single word of it entirely readable, right before your eyes. Yes, I sold them for 15 cents on your penny.
And how long did you do
You know what? It was a great big machine. It was all chromium painted. It had great big balls and lights that went up and down and everything. And you took a penny and you put it in it, and you turned this handle. It was just a press, and it pressed the penny oval shape, and it gave the entire Lord's Prayer. Every single word of it entirely readable, engraved right before your eyes, or stamped. And it was the Protestant version. We should forgive our debtors, not our, you know. One says trespassers, that's a Catholic version. The other one, I think, well, one or the other, but it said forgive us our debtors as we forgive those who did. And
How long did you do that for?
about 7 months.
So you
Then I
gave.
sold hot dogs after that, foot-long hot dogs.
Let me ask a question. Was it easier to sell hot dogs than the Lord's Prayer?
Let me think on this one. I don't know, but the thing is you could eat the hot dogs. You know, you couldn't eat the pennies. And it was interesting because I was really, I guess I was about 16, and I was really, carnivals don't exist like they do anymore. For example, there's no more freak shows. But when I was doing this, there was a freak show, and in this freak show were two people who were Holocaust victims. One guy was, they called him the Turtle Man. He was a hunchback, and he was a midget and a hunchback, and he was a nice guy, and he had tattooed on his back things like turtles, you know, and so they exhibited themselves in the carnival, and she was called the Penguin Girl, because her arms were just little things. They were freaks, you know, and they were Jewish freaks. So I brought them home for Pesach.
Was it a Jewish circus?
No. It was Foley and Burke. Foley and Burke Incorporated or something shows. Limited Incorporated, I forget, it's been a lot of years. But it was called Foley and Burke, and they had like 2 Ferris wheels. That's what they do, but they have a carnival thing, is how many Ferris wheels they have, or how big their rides are. This was a lot of years ago, because like I'm 82, and that's when I was 15, so how many years ago? That's 60 years ago? 50,
That's
years ago?
50...
It's a long time ago.
7, something like that, yeah.
A century ago, half a century ago.
Wow.
And I never thought there was anything wrong with freak shows, but people, and I have now thought that there are things that was pretty terrible that they did to it. Like the pinhead, they exhibited a little pinhead, you know, and the man with an arm sticking out of his chest, and no, it was a leg, I think. I don't know, it was some part, or sticking out of his chest, and a fat woman. And those were terrible things to exhibit people's being, but they had nothing else they could do. I mean, that's what only thing they could do for a living if they were really freaks. These people, the turtle man and the penguin woman, who were really nice people, because as I said, I brought them home to my house, my mother's house for Pesach. My mother didn't blink an eye. She was polite and nice. She didn't know that I was going to bring this kind of people home for Pesach. And they were very polite, and they spoke really good Yiddish, and really good English, and really good French, and really good Spanish. They were educated people. And they had a son that went to Black Fox Military School in, God, I don't know I remember all this. Black Fox Military School in San Diego, and he was like 5 foot 10 inches tall, you know, a regular sized person. So they were just born freaks, and they were locked together. I believe that they survived the camps because they were freaks. They were so interesting looking, you know. I mean, that's what I think. They didn't like to speak about it. People who were in the camps, none of them liked to speak about it.
So you eventually did, meander from Sacramento through a whole bunch of places and a whole bunch of different jobs and lives and careers to San Francisco and then ultimately up the coast, right?
Yeah, well, mostly I was a smuggler. That's how I wrote this book, because I was in prison.
Would you say you were the first grower on the coast, major grower on the coast?
I think I was the first major grower in California. I grew in 1961. A whole piece of ecology brand, Cannabis Americana.
Maybe one of your talents is being adaptable.
Yes, I'm very flexible. In those days, they used to say I was a survivor. Because whatever I could do, I didn't do very well, but I could do it. I wasn't a very good carpenter, but I was good enough. I wasn't a very good plumber, but I was good enough. And at Fitzy's as a dress designer, I was just nothing. I mean, I didn't know anything, except I knew how to sew. Fitzy of California, that's a dress house in San Francisco, a sportswear house. That's the actual job I had, I guess, the most in my whole life. I was there like 2 years or something. I'm not very good at working for people. I don't fall into whatever. Time-wise, things are kind of weird. I came here because I invented something. I invented a gadget to cut fabric for Fitzy of California. They had this fabric called whipped cream, and it was hard to cut because of a wiggle on the table. And my wife actually gave me the idea that I invented a heated cutting knife. And Ernie Banish gave me a bunch of money. And I came up here, and we spent 2 weeks at the Heritage House. Is that me or you?
That's me.
Oh, we spent 2 weeks at the Heritage House, and then my wife said, I'm not going back to San Francisco or anywhere. I don't want to move anywhere. Reva, she said she'd never seen a tree before. She was from the Bronx. And so we went back there to package up all our shit, and it had a floor furnace. The house had a floor furnace. Remember those?
Mm-hmm.
And I lighted it, and the pilot was off, and it had a bunch of dust in it, and it exploded, and the house burned down. So we got a bunch of insurance money, and we came up here with it. And I bought a piece of property, and I don't know what came into my mind. I had never hammered a nail before, and I started to build a house, and I didn't know anything at all about this process. And a guy named Errol Leake, who was here, showed me to do a lot of stuff, and I built this weird house. Anyway, what I'm coming to is it was a weird house. It was 6-sided and had 60 opening windows and had lots of used windows and everything in it. And when I came here, the dump for the county of Mendocino, or maybe not the county of Mendocino, but for Fort Bragg, was just a cement slide into the ocean. You backed up your truck to that, opened it up, and pushed everything down the cement, into the ocean. There was a sign, no corpses. No dead animals. That was one of the major differences when the hippies came here, is the trash. Actually, there wasn't. I mean, people were pretty ecologically minded, the people who came here. The people who were living here had no concept of ecology. They really didn't. I mean, it's just like the redwood trees. We're never going to run out of redwood trees. Never, never. There's billions, trillions, zillions of them. But all of a sudden, there weren't any. And the same as the mussels. There used to be so many mussels. The whole rocks were covered with mussels. I mean, completely covered with mussels. And now there's none. And abalone, all that shit just vanished, man. It's just kind of a shame. It's just kind of a shame. Yes, it is. You know, I've never really had anybody do anything really bad to me. So I couldn't say that it bothered me. The rednecks bothered me. They never bothered me. They liked to smoke weed. They learned to smoke weed. What happened was the hippies came here, And it was such a beautiful place, and everybody else who was living here before thought it was just a mill town. You know, and you worked at a mill or you worked at the grocery store, and there wasn't very many people here. And Mendocino had so many abandoned houses down on Portuguese Flat. You could have bought any house for $5,000.
Mm-hmm.
Any house, they would have kissed you. There was nobody there. There was nobody there. They filled them up real quick, but I didn't understand what was happening. I didn't even notice it until they were already here. I didn't pay attention. In fact, I was always, oh no, that's not true. I was going to say I was always looking for a job, but I was always looking for not working at a job, but I had a job. I mean, I had a family to support.
I read an article by the author named Paul Williams.
Yeah?
Did you meet Paul when he lived
Yeah, I
here?
know him. I know who he is.
Things. He was really into the science fiction author. Philip K. Dick was one of his.
I met him too.
You met Dick?
Yeah.
Tell me
Yeah.
about that.
Well, he came up here. We were living on Star Road right outside of Mendocino. And he fell in love with Valerie McMillan. Valerie McMillan is a pretty wonderful woman. Now there's someone. Anyway, she's her father, I guess, was the physician to the Queen of England. And she fell in love with this guy, Jim McMillan. Her name was Mac something, or he was from Scotland. And she married this guy, and he was a obnoxious drunk. Really obnoxious drunk. And she was a perfect wife. She took care of her kids, she took care of him. I mean, Philip came up here for something and everything, and he somehow ended up at my house. I took him across the street to meet Jim McMillan, who was her husband, and he met Valerie and fell in love with Valerie, and then he kept coming, he came up, and courted her, but she would not do anything. She was married to Jim, even though Jim was an asshole. He was living in Marin County.
Marin, okay, yeah.
I never went down there. He came up here. He came up here quite a few times. Oh yeah, Biff Rose was here, for sure. Who's he? I mean, I know who he is. He went out with my wife. He had a wonderful piano, a little 3/4 length piano he used to carry around with him in his car and play. They all played at the Pine Ridge Lodge, which became Toad Hall. He made up a song. I remember this song from him because he said, let me think if I can remember it. I want to stand in line. I want to stand in line. I want to buy 1,000,000 burgers just to watch him change the sign. About McDonald's. That was it, yeah. I'm going to stand in line. I'm going to stand in line. I'm going to buy 1,000,000 burgers just to watch him change the sign. And he was in love with my wife, who was also a piano player. And the Cat Mothers performed everywhere they performed. They were wonderful. They were fantastic. And I have a belief, I don't know if it's true, but I think that if a band or an organization, a band like that, has people who follow them, who really love them, really enjoy the music, they get better. Because they played great. Oh, they were wonderful. They were just tremendous. Bob Smith, I'm not a very musical person, but I believe Bob Smith was like Beethoven or that kind of thing. He was such a wonderful organ player. And Michael was a great drummer. They were all really good. And what happened is, while I was living in country, I also lived in Elk with John, next door to John, in little tiny houses. They were actually touchy. It's what they call the compound now. It's kind of funny because it was $25 a month when we lived there, and now it's $209 a day, a night. It was just kind of weird. But Elk was an abandoned town. The mill had closed. The crazy Bobby Beacon was there. Truly an insane man. And the Cat Mother hung around me, and I hung around them. They played, and I don't know, Mendocino was a little different. Everybody was younger, and they had the Mendocino Shuffle, which was like changing partners constantly, And sexual liberty just started coming around then, I think, you know, or really got a move on it, you know. Firpo and I were bartenders at Navarro by the Sea when they were really at the height of their playing. Oh. See, it's not true. It says, I met Dan Firpo, who I nicknamed Firpo, not Purple, who had been in the Army, airborne paratrooper, had won a Silver Star at a Purple Heart in 2 clusters in Vietnam. A double hero, wounded badly, shot in the throat, 3 wounds, and a medical discharge with 100% disability. He didn't know it. You didn't know it to look at him because he looked strong and healthy, and he was strong and healthy, but he had a terrible scar on his neck. Firpo was a patriotic and gung-ho and never smoked a joint until he went to Vietnam, and after arriving in Da Nang, he wanted to return to the States immediately because it was obvious that something was wrong with our presence in Vietnam. He didn't because he was an Army lieutenant and he had, I can't read, it's the sunlight there. He didn't because he was an Army lieutenant and not a quitter. Years later, for reasons we shall see, I promoted him to general, but he wouldn't accept the rank. He now calls himself Colonel Firpo. I first met Firpo in 1967 or 68 when he was with Cat Mother Rock Band's road manager. That's how he got to Mendocino County. His brother worked in the music businesses in New York and rock and roll. After Firpo was discharged from the Army, everyone he met was anti-military. This caused him to become somewhat of a true lost soul. Not knowing quite what to do, he began to follow the music scene. Firpo had a military upbringing, military school at Culver. One of his uncles, an Army general, another was a New Hampshire congressman. His ancestor was a famous turn-of-the-century French boxer. His father was French from an ancient noble family, so Firpo had a dual citizenship. His family had always trained to do things conscientiously. They were achievers. The leader of the Cat Mother was Bob Smith, recognizing this attribute in Firpo, a quality necessary to make a good sound man, so he became Firpo's new life. As soon as he was one of the best sound men in the rock and roll world, he also worked with other bands like Ravi Shankar. When Cat Mother moved to the West Coast from New York, Firpo went with them. He fell in love with Greenwood and stayed there for about 10 years. Then he moved to a chateau in Normandy that had been owned by his family for centuries. Firpo could do almost anything but he couldn't tend bar. I taught him how to mix drinks and he quickly learned everything that would ever be ordered in a bar. At least in Greenwood, he just learned how to be a mechanic. Show him something once and he knew how to do it. In an hour he could take apart a motorcycle and put it back together too, correctly. A fastidious, exacting person that had the kind of attitude too that people thought him cold, but he was not. If you tell him something and it isn't precise, he gets very upset. He's dead. I can't believe I wrote this in the present tense. He wasn't dead yet. He and I sometimes had difficulties because, as you know, sometimes I say things that aren't quite on the mark. But Firpo liked me quite a bit. I also grew grass in a small South Greenwood backyard, back at Point Arena. My partner was Tony Martin, called the Blonde Indian. When I met him, he lived in a teepee and had nothing, only ate raw vegetables, fresh vegetables and grains that he ground himself. He was a great cook, and we lived on cabbage soup when there was no money. God, after we sold the crop, which wasn't very good and didn't bring much profit, there was what seemed a lot of cash to Tony. It was the first time he'd ever had any real money. He took a suite at the Hyatt Regency in San Francisco and blew his mind. He never had a good hotel, been in a good hotel. We ate dinner at the Blue Boar, snorted a bunch of coke, and had a grand old time. Then Cassie broke up with Jesse, came to Greenwood, and we got together again, permanently. We lived in a tiny cottage directly on a cliff overlooking the Pacific. We didn't have much money, but we had a good time anyway. More important, Cassie and I talked about getting married and making a good home together. But the job at the Oasis ended. The crop was poor. Sharon needed money for Alexis and Ruben, I also was rapidly going broke. I did some minor plumbing, carpentry works, but times were tight after the Arab oil embargo in 1973 and 74. Recession, people still needed help, but it was harder for them to pay their bills. There was never a job surplus in the isolated rural area near town of 300 people. 300 population because so many people had moved to the country, the competition was extreme for what little work existed. What I wanted to do was buy another but more secluded piece of land in Mendocino County. I needed money to build a house, drill a well, and retire with my goats and chickens and marijuana patch. About the time Jay Fender, who had gone to India, about the time Joy Fender, who had gone to India, returned to Greenwood and told us about smuggling hash. I told Cassie, hey, would you like to go to India? Sure, why not? We borrowed some money from a friend of mine, Danny Court, and Cassie smuggled 15 pounds of hash to San Francisco from India. That's how we discovered the hole in Switzerland. The flight to the States from India was long and tiring. Cassie decided to stay overnight in Europe. The only airline that would give her a stopover for the special fare was Swiss Air. Cassie didn't have enough money to buy the better ticket, so she went to Switzerland into Zurich, then transferred to Geneva. She didn't plan this, but when she told me, I realized that she'd gone through customs with no inspection. She came off the plane and walked right out of the terminal. How wonderful.
That's a great story.
Well, let's see how much of it's true.
Well, you let Bruce Levine co-write that with you.
My English wasn't well, and he made up all the names. Cassie's name was Shelley. Shelley's name was Glenn.
The only one I think he said that was the actual real name was Dan Firpo, because Dan had died at that time, had been dead.
Yeah.
So tell me a little bit more about Dan.
Dan Firpo?
Mm-hmm.
Well, okay. Let's see. I'll tell you one thing that happened that was very interesting. I'm sitting in my house at Elk. Peter Bragg is there with me, a doctor, and his wife, Bonnie Bragg, his new wife. Were there, and they came down to hear the cat mother play at the Oasis. And we were sitting smoking a joint in my house at Elk, and I was taking a shower because I was going to work, tending bar, and I dropped a mirror in the shower and cut my hand right here. So Peter, being a doctor, said, oh shit, you'll have to go to the hospital, that takes some stitches. And I said, oh, can't you use this, any kind of needle? He says, no, I gotta have a thing. And Firpo had a medical kit. That's just how complete he was. He had a complete medical kit. He had like this needles, curved needles, and the thread, and the forceps and the whole thing from the army. And he said, hey, I've got all that. And he gave it to Peter, and Peter sewed me up right at my house. It was pretty proud. But that's the kind of person Firpo was. He had everything together.
He helped you escape France and come back to the United States.
Not only did that, his family had a house on Rue de la Seine, right across from the Louvre, right across the river from the Louvre. And they'd had it for centuries. It was the fifth floor of an apartment. It was a fifth floor apartment that had 11 rooms in it, all over, scattered, And he had 4 reservations on airplanes for when I arrived. But every time I arrived, I was ready to go. He had it together, and I came on the Concorde. He had it so together. And that's just how he was, He just had everything together.
I thought it was impressive how he made you up, to resemble a photograph that wasn't really you.
Cello, the guy's name, the guy's passport I had.
Or Celovec?
Cello, yeah, Celovec. I had his shirt, his glasses, and his cap. I looked just like him, but I didn't. Oh, I didn't have his cap, no. We were going to the airport, and Firpo said, you don't just look right. You look good, but not right. And there was a group of some kind of religious Baptist people who had just come back from Africa, and they all were wearing berets. The berets. And he said, went into the store and bought me a beret, and I just fit in with everybody then. And I got on the airplane. They have an exit customs in France. You go through your passport stamp. They didn't even look at me. I came into the United States, and I didn't know whether I was supposed to say, okay, I escaped, it's a false passport, you know, and whatever you want to do, or I should just try and slide through. Because although in France I looked like him, in the United States I didn't look like him. And I came to the customs in the United States, the woman opened up the passport like this, you know. She opened the passport and she had a weight, one of those little things you keep the book thing open, she put it right over the picture. She said, did you have a nice time in Europe? I said, well, I was only there for a few days. She said, okay, boom. She stamped me in. I couldn't believe it. I came in, I actually kissed the ground outside of LA airport. I couldn't believe it. And I called my mother. I thought she was going to have a heart attack. Oh, I never thought I'd see her again. But she did. I mean, they wanted me to do 18 years in prison. I was going to be the death of many black children in Oakland were going to die because of the opium that I brought in. And it never even entered my mind that would happen. I just had a lot of friends who liked to smoke opium or eat opium or take opium, and I didn't have any other way to make a living. I had no talent. I mean, I really didn't have anything. John was the most wonderful person that ever walked on the face of the earth.
And why was that?
Because he was good. He was kind. He was gentle. He was a wonderful human being. God, I miss him. Son of a bitch had no right to die before me. I had it all set up. We had it all set up. He was going to take care of everything when I died because I was 10 years older than him. Or I don't know what the expression is, but he had no right to die. You know why he died? He died from a hernia. The last day before he died, he was taking a bath at my house and he couldn't get out of the bathtub. I went to help him out of the bathtub and I saw this thing growing on his stomach. I couldn't believe it. It was like he was pregnant almost. It was huge. I said, "What? Why don't you go to a doctor?" "Don't nag me." I said, "I'm not going to nag you, but that looks really like a serious thing. If you ask me one more time about that, I'm never going to talk to you again." And then the next morning he got up and he said, "Listen, I'm going to go to the doctor today because I'm really worried about this." And maybe you're right. He went down and instead of going to the doctor, he went and got art supplies. And on the way back, he turned left on 128. And you know on the right, when you turn left there's a little pull-off. Well, he pulled off there and bumped into the fence and was sitting in his car. A highway patrol guy came up and said, "May I have your driver's license and your insurance?" And he gave it to him. The cop went back and did whatever they do, and 5 minutes later he came back and he was dead. He died like in 5 minutes. And it was so wasteful. It was so wasteful that he should die. God damn. He didn't take care of his hernia. Simple operation, could have taken care of it in a matter of minutes, but what happened was the hernia closed a bile duct to his liver or something. He must have died in agony. 5 minutes of agony, but he never bitched. There was nothing you could say bad about a perfect person. He came from the East Coast, and he's the black sheep of his family. His father was an actuary. You know what that is? For the insurance company before they had computers, you know, he was an actuary. He was brilliant. His father was brilliant. He died, I forget. His brother was killed in an airplane crash through his own plane. His other brother was in the insurance business. I only met them once for the funeral, you know, when they came for the funeral. But John and I hung around together for 20 years or so. We were neighbors, and then we lived together, and then he lived in Comshy. And he was a private, very private person in a funny kind of way. You got the surface real easy, but to get down in him, you had to go, took a long time. You had to live next door to him. He went to work for American Greeting Cards. He worked for them for a year or 2 years, and then he came out to California with a friend of his, and once they hit California, they just did what they did. He was an odd duck in a way. He has only drawn one picture of a woman in all the stuff he ever drew. one picture. God, I got a whole bunch. Did you see the stuff she's got?
No.
Oh, you should see what I gave her. I gave her
Yeah.
let me see, I know one of them's right here. But he used to do napkins. He used to draw on napkins. The seagull. Another poster he did. She has it. But that's one of his like napkin drawings. On the back of a bill at the seagull. And he was a fantastic artist. Fantastic artist. We were in a comic book together. Did you ever see the Mendocino comic? He drew it. It was an adventure we took in the woods.
So,
I wrote it and he drew it. Originally it was Eat Your Trash. But then he just got Eat Your Beer Cans.
wow.
Beer cans used to, you had to open them with an opener. One of the things he hated was trash. He disliked people fucking with the earth. Once he got here, he never wanted to leave. To get him to go to San Francisco was like cutting off your nose. Really, he never wanted to leave. He liked it here. The only thing he couldn't get here was art supplies. One of the things we used to do is hang out, watch TV, and he'd play music to the commercials, which was really fun, actually. That was really fun. He'd play the guitar to the commercials, and we'd sit around. He could play any stringed instrument, a harp, a piano, a violin, a mandolin, any stringed instrument he could play. Any stringed instrument. A week and a half before he died, he just got a Steinway piano. It didn't matter what it is, and he was always a musician. He wanted to be a musician, not an artist. But he was an artist to make a living. But what he really wanted to do was play music. He never led, or whatever they call people who are in charge of a band, but he always fit in. Always.
Wow.
One Halloween he made a costume, he became Highway 1. He made himself entirely black and drew yellow dots on the side of his face one side and broken line on the other. And he played at Evelyn's that night. That was really fun. That's when I escaped from prison. That was the first place I went to. Yeah, Evelyn's Oasis. That's an elk.
Didn't Bobby Beacon have a club down there too?
Bobby Beacon still has a club down there. It's called Beacon Light by the Sea. I'll tell you real quickly, okay? John and myself and Mike Lakeland, we'd grown grass in Comshy and it was okay, but I don't know if I bought that property or not yet. I don't know exactly the time. But anyway, I was working for Bobby Beacon. He can't read or write. And I was a bartender for him, but then he wanted me to read him like Time Magazine and Newsweek. He wants to stay up on things happening. And he told us we could grow weed on his property. He had a huge, enormous piece of property. His mother was a Crocker, you know, the Crocker Bank, and he owned all the property from Elk to Philo, all the Cliff Ridge, all of it, thousands and thousands of acres. And he lost it because people took advantage of him. But anyway, he still had a bunch of property left. He said we could grow weed on it. So the deal was we would grow weed on it, and then in return for that, we would run him for sheriff. Rancher, logger, human being. John made the poster, you know, and we ran him for sheriff, and I became a voter registrar, registered a lot of voters to vote for him, and he actually got 1,000 votes on the coast, but he lost for sheriff, of course. And he turned us in. What brought this to mind? Oh, we all went out and grew weed on his property. We got this, you know, we grew weed on his property. And then when he didn't win the sheriff, he turned us into the cops. And they came and pulled it all up. We used to walk out there, and John used to play his banjo as we walked. He liked to play the banjo when we walked. He was so cool. He was such a wonderful human being, man. He was as close to being perfect as you can get. But, of course, he wasn't perfect. None of us are. But he was close.
I've seen the picture of you in Nick Wilson's book. standing on the roof of B'nai Boo. Tell me about B'nai Boo.
Really? Okay. I wrote an opera called Boo Stands for Marijuana, I Stand for Marijuana Too. Boo stands for marijuana, and I stand for marijuana too. Boom, boom, boom. Boo stands for marijuana, and I stand for marijuana too. Well, now the dear old love, it when it's very young, makes the birds sing until the song is sung. Boo stands for marijuana, and I stand for marijuana too. That's one of the songs in the opera, and John and I were just talking, and Boo for me was an old black expression in New York, and I don't know how we came up with the name of B'nai Boo, but I will tell you what happened, is that this guy, Alan Morgan, came from Florida, and he had sold a bunch of property that was underwater. And it wasn't underwater when he sold it, but some of the day it was underwater when the tide came in. But he had a whole bunch of cash. He was driving Ian Fleming's Bentley, the guy who wrote James Bond. He was driving his Bentley, drove all the way from Florida to here. He came with a guy, his lawyer, whose name was Eli, and he bought the property known as China Hill in Mendocino. And then we fell in together, and he just didn't know, he learned to like to smoke weed, and he gave up all his business sense. He became a very spiritual man, and he still is, I think, a very spiritual man I haven't seen for a lot of years. And he said that, I said I wanted to start a Jewish community. Oh, here's what happened is that I had a baby boy, Abraham, and I wanted to get, God, I'm sorry, I can't remember exactly the order of things gone, but there was a guy in town who owned a restaurant called The Uncommon Good. His name was Larry Zolotar. And I had this baby boy, and I said, I got to get a minion together to name my kid. And he said, sure, you can meet at the restaurant Saturday morning before we open up. So I got John, you have to get 10, I got John, and a whole bunch of people. We got there, we smoked a bunch of weed, and drank coffee, and ate these things called lumpy dumps that they made there, which were really little kind of round muffins, and very tasty, and had a little Jewish service. And I said, the only thing we've got in common is we all like to smoke boo, because I still had that opera in my mind. And John said, well, this is the Brotherhood of Boo, B'nai Boo, and that's how it started. And then Alan came, and he told me about this property. I said, well, he paid $50,000 down, it was $100,000 for the property, and he had to pay a balloon payment at the end of the year. And he had fallen to pieces, he was no longer a business person, so I said, you know what we got to do is we got to build a shul here. What I did was I got everybody together, and in one day we built that building. We started out in the morning with the ground, and I slept in it that night. We had about 20 people helping us. This guy named Nat Bingham, he was really a talented carpenter and put together, and Firpo, and John, and most of the cat mother worked there. Roy worked on it. Bob Smith came there. Paul Katzoff came there, and it was just a coming together of the community. And that's when we discovered that you didn't have to be Jewish to be Booish. And you didn't have to be Jewish to be Booish, and so that it was open to anybody. It was really nice. I lived there for maybe 8-9 months before they foreclosed on it, and finally came up and pushed the building over with a tractor and everything, because we couldn't get together 50 grand together. We tried, but Alan fell apart, and I was busy doing something, I don't know. Well, I was busy going back and forth to Europe and Asia. And I don't know. I didn't try hard enough. I left him to do it, and he had fallen into spirituality. He changed completely. He was a great salesman. He used to sit up on his desk in Florida, and he'd call people up in Minnesota and say, how's the weather out there? I'm about to go swimming, and it was snowing. He'd say, listen, if you come down and listen to my pitch, I'll give you 2 free days at the Fontainebleau, And they come down. Once they got him to come down, he sold them. He sold them. He was a great salesman. And then when he came here, and found, what was the guy's name? Maharishi? No. I forget what the guru he found. It was some Indian guy. I forget what his name was. He started to follow him. He believed in his rules, and he stopped eating meat and ate only crudité, and he changed completely. He became as spiritually oriented as he did become a salesman. I mean, he was the best. He was the most spiritual.
I thought maybe we'd walk down and take a look at the mural.
Oh, okay, sure.
If you're into that.
Yeah. I was a lot younger when they painted that.
Well, let's talk about that. So how did you get painted onto a mural?
Guy had a photograph of me.
And why you?
I don't know. I don't know. I really don't know.
What does the actual crowd represent? Just local people?
Just local people waiting for the train.
Wow.
No, I only met the guy one time. He said, "Do you mind if I put your picture on the wall?" I said, "No, go for it." And that was it.
Wow.
So I don't know. He took. Have you seen that mural? Of course you see that mural.
I've seen it.
Everybody in it's very kind of interesting looking. The twins, you know. Yeah.
Well, let's take a walk down there and take a picture, or do a little filming down there. Leon was a Jewish mystic.
Well, he was a Jewish mystic, and he was very, 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 very religious and a Kabbalist, and he was ran out of Spain. All the Jews were run out of Spain in the late 1890s and early 1900s, and he was run out of Spain, I think, and he ended up in the Vale in Poland, in Russia, whatever that was called, in Khazaria. And he never learned to speak the language of the country. But as I said, one thing that a Jewish community dislikes is a single person. You know, they just think that first of all, you're like 20-something, you're an old maid if you're a woman, and there's no such thing as a single man. Single men, it's weird. Jews are strange in their changing to the 20th century, 19th century, 20th century. They became more modern. Before that time, there was a set rule for women and a set rule for men, you know. And if you weren't a craftsman or a butcher or something like that, the best thing you could do was to study. And my great-grandfather was the first rabbi in Oakland. And they're extremely religious, and I was never religious, and my father was very religious. And that I'm trying to explain why they didn't talk to each other, because they had arguments, religious arguments that were really serious in the interpretation of certain laws.
Minutiae things.
Yeah, real minutiae, you know, whether you should do this or that, or, you know, and they carried on. I think I've never been in a family with so many people. I mean, you gotta remember, there was 11 kids, a mother and a father, 13 people, plus cousins and uncles and whatever they were hanging around. That was when they left Russia. No. When they lived on 23rd and T, there was only 10 of them. You want me to tell you a quick story? Okay. When I was about, I guess, 28 years old, and my daughter was born, we're living on, my wife and I are living on 33rd Street in San Francisco, and I get a phone call, and it's this woman who has this weird accent. It's indescribable. It's like a Texas Yiddish accent. And what she says is, she says, "I'm your Aunt Gussie." I said, "I didn't know. Did I already say this, tell you this story?" No. "I'm your Aunt Gussie, and I saw in the paper that you had a baby girl, and I've got the cancer, and I'd like to come and see you. I'd like to see this girl, this little girl." I said, "Yeah, you're my father's sister. I didn't know there were any girls." She said, "Yes, I was." And here's what happened to this woman. She came to the United States with everybody else, came to Sacramento. They came to Sacramento with much effort, and then she, the boys went to work, They were tailors, and they opened a store, and they did all kinds of things. And Gussie was my grandmother's slave. She was there. She was not of any value. She couldn't read, she couldn't write. There was no reason to teach a girl to read or write, because she didn't have anything to read or write. You know, she was not going to be a person in the community. So one day the woman from the Jewish agency came over to see my grandmother, where she came all the time. And she saw Gussie. She said, "Who's that?" She said, "My grandmother said, that's my daughter, Gussie." The woman said, "Well, how come nobody ever knows her?" "Oh, because she doesn't go out of the house." "Why doesn't she go out of the house?" "Because there's no reason for her to go out of the house." So the woman said, "Not in the United States, that doesn't happen." So she started taking her out, you know, to Weinstock Lubin's, and took her to the movies. Well, according to Gussie, she loved movies. She really was crazy about movies. She went to the movies, and in the movies, she got pregnant. She didn't even know actually how she got pregnant, but she got pregnant. When she came back and she missed her period, my grandmother, I'm sure, was checked the sheets or whatever. My grandmother beat her with a strap and chained her to the bed. Lovely woman, huh? So Gussie, I didn't know all this. So Gussie escaped, went back. The usher who got her pregnant didn't want to see her. She didn't know what to do. Didn't speak hardly any English. Some guy in Sacramento got a hold of her. She had an abortion, couldn't have any children, horrible tale. Went to work as a prostitute in Reno. She was like really in those, you know, she didn't understand what was happening to her. So while she was a prostitute, she met this man, Cliff. And he was this great big Gentile man, I mean, big and red-faced and everything, from Texas. And he had a little carnival, and they, I guess, fell in love, or I don't know what happened, but they were married, and they lived together 38 years, which is a long time to live together, okay? So she came and told me most of the story that's in this book. She came there, she saw Daisy, she was really kind. She gave Daisy a bunch of jewelry, you know, that she smuggled from Russia, or had gotten from Russia, and then she died. She was a little tiny old woman. They drove all the way here from Cut and Shoot, Texas, is where they were from. And they had a carnival, and they retired, and they were very happy. And her husband, Cliff, was very happy, but, you know, she said, "He's a Gentile." It was only fault. And they never had any children, because she was, when she had the abortion, she was fucked up, and so there was nothing. So I didn't know half of this story. I didn't know a third of the story, because nobody talked of it, and everybody died. By the time I was 28, all the Anapolskys were gone. Well, they had lived maybe 100 years without a pogrom, and then a pogrom came. You know, the Soviet Union, or the whites, or the reds, who knows who, but everybody always liked to kill the Jews. And they did come. And there was another sister besides her that stayed in Shemshel, and she hid in a grave with all the children, and because the Cossacks were afraid to go into the graveyard. And these children lived, and she lived, but I never have met her.
That's a great story.
Well, let's see how much of it's true.